Welcome to Krystal, Kyle, and Friends. We have a wonderful guest for you today who we are very excited to speak with. One of the former Gravel teens. He's now, I think, a Gravel 20-something-year-old.
Now he's a Gravel senior citizen. That is correct. He's joined the AARP.
Henry Williams, he was, part of the Gravel campaign. He launched that campaign and has now co-founded the Gravel Institute and is doing really important work to build up left infrastructure. Just very excited to get his perspective.
Yeah, I will say I was a little too harsh on them at the beginning. So I just watched their documentary, American Gadfly, about Mike Gravel and the campaign and everything. And at the beginning, I remember when they announced the run, first of all, as such a Bernie bro, I was like, it all goes to Bernie. Like in my mind, that's like, what are you doing? It's Bernie, it's Bernie. So that was my initial reaction. But then also the cynical part of me, and again, I was incorrect in this, but the cynical part of me was like, I think these teens are just trying to get clout. And I think it's about them. And what is clear to me now that I've learned since then is actually no.
It was actually the polar opposite.
It was the polar opposite. They wanted to take a senator who they know and respect and knew a lot about. This guy's an American hero. And really stood for moral values and ethics and doing the right thing and dismantling the American empire and all the right things. And they wanted to take his legacy and remind everybody of that legacy, but then also serve the function of like, no, let's shift the Overton window and make this election, this primary, actually about the issues. And yes, you have Bernie Sanders on stage. Yes, he's amazing. But you know what? There are some areas where Bernie Sanders can improve.
Yeah.
And so they said, we're going to be his left flank. We're going to try to drag that Overton window to the left. And it's about the issues. It's obviously not about, the self-aggrandizement of Mike Gravel. I mean, how absurd would that be? So I was a little too harsh on them early on. And I think now looking back at it, they weren't doing it just for clout.
No, I mean, again, the polar opposite of that. It was all about the values and not at all about the personalities. And it was also very clever and courageous what they did too.
And when I saw how they made Mike Gravel feel, because at first, again, I thought they're kind of taking advantage of this guy. No, Mike Gravel.
Oh, he was
almost like waiting for somebody. He was 89 years old. He was waiting for somebody to take that Gravel torch and run with it. And I don't think he had anybody until that point. And then these kids came along and they were like, "We're going to do it because we believe in you and your vision." And, it was emotional, like watching that American Gadfly. Everybody check it out.
Yeah, it's great. And that's one of the parts of the movie that makes you feel so great is you see how at the very end of his life, they come in and make him so relevant and so known and so germane to a new generation that's now learning from and inspired by his legacy. I mean, if they accomplished nothing else, which they did accomplish many other things and are continuing to do so, but if that was it, that would have been a profound gift to all of us.
I'm telling you, you got to go watch the documentary. You guys are going to love it. If you want to see all the stuff going on behind the scenes in the primary, and you get to see Andrew Yang, Tulsi Gabbard, everything behind the scenes you get to see because they're running the campaign. Go check out American Gadfly.
One other thing about Gravel is he is such a believer in democracy, like direct democracy, such faith.
Which is one of my big things now.
In the people. And I mean, you talk about a true sort of populist and belief and faith that, collectively we're going to do better than these corrupt assholes. That's him.
So what's the idea I've been talking about more and more and more and more is every time you vote for president, I think you should be able to vote on 5 very important political issues as well, like minimum wage, legalizing marijuana, ending the wars, paid sick leave, which is so important in the middle of a pandemic that's been raging for 2 years. So if you're able to vote directly on that every 4 years when you go vote for president, we already have a laundry list of the things that we love and we care about. And guess who got to that issue decades ago? It was Mike Gravel. Mike Gravel, his dynamics probably aren't exactly the same as mine. I made mine up and pulled that out of my ass.
A third
branch of government that's a direct democracy branch of government. So that's a little different, but it's the same idea.
Great idea.
And so anyway.
Okay, so before we get to Henry, though, we had a couple of stories that we wanted to bring to you. So Kamala Harris, our vice president, did a relatively rare sit-down interview with Craig Melvin of NBC. Craig pressed her on a number of things, including their coronavirus response. Let's take a listen to a little of that.
At what point does the administration say, you know what, this strategy isn't working, we're going to change strategies? 6 former administration officials last week wrote that open letter urging the administration to change course, to change strategy. Is it time?
It is time for us to do what we have been doing, and that time is every day. every day it is time for us to agree that there are things and tools that are available to us to slow this thing down. And so right now we know we still have a number of people that is in the millions of Americans who have not been vaccinated and could be vaccinated, and we are urging them to get vaccinated because it will save their life.
At what point does the administration acknowledge these people aren't going to get the shot? They're just not going to do it.
I don't believe in giving up on people, Craig. I really don't.
The 500 million tests that have been ordered that are going to be sent to every American, do we know when those are going out?
Shortly, though they're going to go out shortly.
Next week,
they've been ordered. I have to look at the current information. I think it's going to be by next week, but soon, absolutely soon. And it is a matter of urgency for us.
Should we have done that sooner?
We are doing it.
But should we have done it sooner?
We are doing it.
Less than inspiring. And just the quote when she's asked about should you change strategies at this point, this is the quote, just to read it back to you. It is time for us to do what we have been doing, and that time is every day. Every day it is time for us to agree that there are things and tools that are available to us. What?
When he asked, should you have done it sooner? Here's the answer you give. Yeah. Yeah. And then, by the way, I don't even think you get headlines out of that. People just be like, yeah, of course.
Right.
And by the way,
yeah, but
even if there are headlines,
time to spin it up or whatever.
Even if there are headlines, you're being honest and forthright and straightforward. And when you show honesty, what that indicates to people is you will continue to be honest, and that builds points with them. It also shows
that's an important
you're not just honest to the world, you're also being honest with yourself about your shortcomings, and then you can address that and change and go in the right direction. But should you have done it sooner? We're doing it. Okay. Should you have done it sooner?
We're doing it. And the other thing, just on a political theater, she's so bad at this.
She's terrible at it.
These are the most obvious questions. And Craig isn't going easy on her. I mean, he's pressing her a little bit. But these are the most obvious questions you could possibly be getting about tests, about the coronavirus strategy, about, hey, you've probably gotten vaccinated, most of the people that is it time to, think about another direction? All of these things are just basic talking points 101 that you should have been briefed on and prepared for. It reminds me of, some of the leaks in the chatter that have come out of her world, which is apparently very dissatisfied. You have everybody from Simone Sanders to a number of other aides who have left, is that it's extremely frustrating. She's given briefing materials. She does not engage with them or prepare, and then when things don't go well, as they did not in this interview, then she blames the staffers for not preparing her adequately. I mean, sit on the fact that this is the person who the Democratic Party handpicked.
Her or Pete?
As this is who we want to be the next president of the United States. It's astonishing.
Look, from a basic, let's zoom out for a second here and just think about politics in a very broad and generalized way, okay? What are some character traits that you need in order to be a good politician? Well, I mean, one thing is just like charisma. Mm-hmm. You have to have charisma. You have to have some X factor that makes you likable. You don't even necessarily have to have charisma. You just have to not be unlikable, okay? She doesn't have charisma, and she's not likable. Then you have other things people respect in politicians and seem to gravitate towards: strength and authenticity. And you don't even have to be authentic. You just have to feel like you're being authentic. Right. She doesn't have either one of those. Right. No charisma. She's not likable. No authenticity. No strength. Of course you're going to have like a 28% approval rating, which is what she has. And then when you look at this, you go, oh my God, she would lose to Mike Pence. She would lose to somebody on the other side who, Ted Cruz might be able to beat her.
Get destroyed by Trump.
Ted Cruz, Mr. Smarmy. I'm Ted Cruz. Me. The guy who talks nasally, who's incredibly awkward, who also is not anywhere near authentic.
Or likable.
Because at least what the one thing he has that she doesn't? Well, maybe this changed recently with the whole Trump thing and January 6th, but
him
he at least had he at least had the base.
Some strength.
No, not even strength. Some element of the base was with him. Now that may have changed, but I mean, oh God, you want to talk about it would be worse than Trump-Hillary if it was Ted Cruz versus Kamala Harris. Oh my God, I'm giving myself an aneurysm just talking about it.
That is really bad.
I want to get to the substance of it real quick because I think this is actually important. So there's a lot of debate on the left and in the country in general as to, well, what really should we do in regards to the pandemic? And some people on the left are just flat out saying, look, we need another lockdown. This thing's out of control. What are we going to do? It is what it is. Some teachers unions, like in Chicago, they're striking. They want at least to temporarily be out of the class. Although some teachers also just want more.
They came to an agreement, by the way, back in the classroom.
Okay, yeah, or they just want more safety standards within the classroom, whatever it is. But there is a debate on the left, hey, lockdown versus don't lockdown. There is a debate, vaccine mandate versus no vaccine mandate. That's going on as well. And everybody knows my personal take on that. I think there's another option on the table, which is the vaccine or test policy.
Yeah.
But so what would I do? I mean, I would have done vaccine or test. I wouldn't have done it for businesses with 100 employees or more. I would have done it with all businesses. So that's one thing I would have done. And the other thing I would have done, and I think this is a no-brainer, but this is not something I've heard people talk about or harp away on, even though they should be, is Defense Production Act. Use it for masks. Use it for monoclonal antibodies. Use it for tests. Use it for remdesivir. All this stuff that now we got the word, okay, only one of the 3 versions of monoclonal antibodies works against Omicron, and now it's in short supply. Why wouldn't you have invoked the Defense Production Act day one of your presidency to say, look, we got to make sure just in case there's another spike, in case something happens, we got to make sure we have a stockpile of this stuff as far as the eye can see. But they didn't do it because they don't know how to govern, because they don't care about governing, because they're neoliberals. And part of the neoliberal philosophy and ideology is government can do some things, but not too much.
Well,
we can only do tweaks around the edges.
yeah,
we can only do partnerships with the private marketplace. FDR is rolling over in his grave right now when he looks at these people who govern but don't believe in government. And then, of course, you get stuff like this. And you get stuff like Jen Psaki laughing at the idea of getting Americans tests when every other developed country was getting Americans tests way before the United States.
That was astonishing. And there's an ideological issue. There's also just a straight-up competence issue. I mean, they were apparently, reporting says, presented with a plan to ramp up test production ahead of Omicron, which, look, nobody knew what the specific next variant would be. But it was, it was always a major possibility, if not a likelihood, that there would be another variant that, we even before Omicron emerged, we were saying, what's going to happen in the winter? What's going to happen when people get together with the holidays? This was all incredibly predictable. And they said, nah, we're good. So, I mean, there's an ideological issue here. And then there's a basic competence issue here. And it truly is unforgivable. And I do think the critique of them, Craig was kind of getting at this of like, some of these people are just not going to get vaccinated. So what is the rest of your plan?
Yeah.
That's legitimate to say, because what's easy for them and what's easy for a lot of liberals is just to say everything that's going bad right now, it's the fault of the unvaccinated people. That's the entirety of the problem, because then, well, they don't have to do anything. It's all about those bad people out there who won't do their responsible thing. And you should go get the vaccine, not just for yourself, but to protect the people around you. But that is not the entirety of what a COVID plan, response plan should ultimately look like. And they have wanted to completely abdicate their responsibility in all other regards. And I always have to bring up, one of the most damaging things that they've done or failed to do is pushing for patent protection around the world to help to stop new variants for emerging, and also just because it's the right thing to do to give the developing world access to the global south, access to the same life-saving vaccines that we ultimately have here. And, they did the rhetorical, yes, we support it, and then they've done absolutely nothing to actually bring Big Pharma to heel and make that a reality.
So that's the real conspiracy. That real conspiracy that's out in the open is they're not lifting the patent protections, and what that means is there are no generic vaccines being made in factories that can make those generic vaccines. So we have many fewer vaccines that are in the developing world. The rate is so low, and when you have a virus spread as rapidly as it's spreading now through populations that are unprotected, that's even more likely they're going to get a variant. In fact, Delta came from India when they were largely unvaccinated.
Yeah.
So, you're rolling the dice here. You're playing Russian roulette here.
The entire continent of Africa has something like an 8% vaccination rate. It's
don't worry, Bill Gates is he's on top of it with COVAX.
Completely abhorrent. Yeah. And to your point, the real conspiracy is they love to be able to charge the premium prices to us here in the U.S. and other rich countries around the world and keep the poor world as basically guinea pigs so that they can spin up a new variant that then requires more boosters or a new vaccine or whatever to keep their profits going.
Correct.
That's the real conspiracy here.
That's true. I do want to add to one thing you said, though, because you're right. Now, part of their strategy, I don't know if they've outwardly said this, but it's probably coming, is, well, just say it's the unvaccinated's fault and then move on. And so this way you could just pawn off all your failures. Now, on the one hand, listen, there is some semblance of individual responsibility because the vaccine at this point is free at the point of service. You go in there, you can get the vaccine.
Yeah.
And there is some percentage of the population that's not going to get vaccinated. I'm not going to sit here and pat them on the head and be like, it's totally fine. Well, it's really not that fine because I know because I went in the hospital for my leg, and the hospital emergency room was jam-packed. I mean, there were people who just got in car accidents sitting there half-conscious, and they didn't have a hospital bed. There were people going through withdrawal. They didn't have a hospital bed. There was this poor woman who came in who had a poor girl, little girl who came in with a broken finger. She had to sit there and wait for 15 minutes before she could get help.
Writhing in pain.
And
horrible.
So what's happening is because the hospitals are being overstressed with COVID patients, that means a lot of people who it's not COVID-related have to wait a hell of a lot longer. So I'm not taking all responsibility away from the unvaccinated people.
Yeah.
But what I will say is this. What can you do and what should you do if you're the federal government? Well, for the love of God, do anything and everything in your power to beef up hospital capacity. In the middle of the pandemic, they tried to do this, like in 2020 at some point, they tried to do this. Hey, we got this military boat that's being repurposed for, COVID patients if need be. So why are you not? I mean, there should be a massive... Why wouldn't the federal government come out and say, you know what, $50,000? They're doing this with the military. We're having trouble getting people because of the pandemic. $50,000 signing bonus come in. They should be doing this with, look, doctors, we need you. I know that everybody who can retire is retiring because you're overstressed and overworked and all that stuff, but $50,000 sign-up bonus and we're beefing up hospital capacity over here and over here and over here and over here. And, none of that was done. So I don't think the unvaccinated are totally blameless because they are overstressing the system, and these are the people who are largely dying from this. But at the same time, if you have a policy in place, or at least they're trying with vaccine or test, it doesn't go far enough, but okay, vaccine or test, and still some people are not going to get the vaccine. That's going to happen. Some people are not going to get the vaccine. You have to deal with that reality in an adult way, and the adult way to do it is exactly what I'm saying. Use all the resources that you have at your disposal, Defense Production Act and other stuff, in order to beef up hospital capacity, create more of the treatments that we know work, so on and so forth.
Yeah, and she tries to frame it as, well, I'm not giving up on those people. No. Okay, fine. Don't give up on those people.
No.
But at the same time... do all of the shit that you possibly can do, and don't just throw up your hands and, what can we do? We're trying our best to convince this population that's very unlikely to ultimately be convinced. On the hospital thing, too, I mean, this is very real, and it's not just... With Omicron, there are significant numbers, and we don't know exactly the number, of people who are coming in, they're getting tested. They're coming in for something else. They're getting tested because Omicron is so infectious. They're there for something else, and they happen to have COVID, and COVID is not the main reason that they ultimately are there. That's pointed at by a lot of folks who want to say, these numbers are being inflated, et cetera, and the hospital crisis really isn't that bad because most of these people, they're just there incidentally with COVID. That still takes up a lot of resources, though, because if you now have a person who's infectious with COVID, even if that isn't the primary reason that they're there, you have to go through all of those protocols to make sure that it doesn't spread further. So that's tremendously taxing on hospital resources. And then this comes at a time, as you alluded to, that a lot of nurses, a lot of doctors who could retired because this was so incredibly stressful and horrific, and a tiny percentage, really quite small, that because of vaccine mandates left. And so you have this kind of perfect storm where, the hospitals really are in a very difficult and very stressed place. So, yes, this is not to let the unvaccinated off the hook or say that they have no responsibility. It's to say, guess what, Kamala Harris, you have some responsibility too.
Correct. And just a random aside here, because I'm probably deeply autistic and I can't let it go, but to the point that a lot of people on the right make about, you go in with some other problem and then you get tested and you have COVID and they count that towards you having COVID. This is crazy. Do you have any idea how many people have COVID and either take a rapid test and it never gets in any official results, or don't take any tests at all and they're sitting at home with it? This idea that it's being wildly inflated, the exact opposite is true. I watched a documentary on pandemics. This was even before COVID hit, and they were very clear. Every pandemic in history is undercounted during the pandemic. Why? Because the official capacity always lags way behind what the reality of the situation is. And now we're getting word, I covered this on my show, there's an entire county in Missouri where the coroner's like, we don't do COVID deaths. So there are some people that have an ideological predisposition of this thing is being overblown, and they're not counting any of the deaths as COVID deaths. So I just need everybody to pump the brakes, because it's not what they think how they think the numbers are skewed, it's actually the exact opposite, and we know that as a matter of historical fact. So if there are people who have this and they go in and they get tested, oh, you had COVID too, but you're asymptomatic, at the very least, you should include those people in the statistics, because of all the people who have COVID, who have no interaction with the system. Your daughter, for example, had COVID. She was never counted in the official statistics.
Yeah.
These numbers are nowhere near what the actual numbers are.
One other piece of data to back up your point, which is that, and I do think Omicron is a little bit different because it's so infectious and because it's more mild, that there are more people who fall into that category of with COVID instead of because of COVID. But if you look over the course of the pandemic, the spikes in hospitalization with COVID exactly mirror the spikes in excess deaths. So
right.
This is, they track each other very closely. So that just shows you that, yes, this was real. Yes, when people are hospitalized with COVID, this is a real thing. And it leads ultimately to, it's led to significant death. Probably 1 million Americans have died.
Yeah, so I've read an article on this exact thing where, when the official COVID deaths number was 800,000, they said the real number, if you include the excess deaths, was over 1 million, just over 1 million.
Yeah.
So that's how much is probably undercounted by.
What's our former president up to these days?
So Donald Trump is making